Welcome to Fantasy Football Today. It's a great day to be breaking down the NFL schedule. That's right. All the teams know where they're going, know who they're playing. We're going to tell you some fantasy football advice around the NFL schedule. And as always, get you ready to dominate your fantasy leagues. I'm Jamie, that's Dave, that's Heath, and welcoming back our buddy Ben Gretsch. Let's get right to it, guys, with the teams that have some favorable schedules to open the season. I always like to look at the first 4 games. I think that's really the most impactful part of the schedule. I know a lot of you like to look ahead to the fantasy playoffs, but so much changes between the start of the year and the end of the year. We know that. But I think if you get a good head start with the beginning of the schedule, that can certainly help your fantasy team and help you on draft day. So, guys, let's get right to it. Looking at the teams that have favorable schedules to open the season. And as we see here, we got some teams like San Francisco, the Chargers, the Cardinals, all favorable schedules to start the year. Let's look at it with the 49ers, starting with them and what they have. Arizona, the Jets, the Giants, and the Eagles. I mean, those first 3 games could be great from a defensive standpoint in terms of they're not going to face a lot of tough ones. Then you have the Chargers and the Cardinals. We'll break those down coming up in a second. But Heath, when you look at the 49ers and you see Raheem Mostert, you see Tevin Coleman, maybe it helps the passing game. We know that's not the most exciting part of this team. Not really going to change much for George Kittle, but how much more excitement do you have now for a guy like Mostert and maybe Tevin Coleman as well?
Yeah, I think this sets up really well for at least 2 of these games, possibly 3, maybe all 4, but at least 2 of these games, you could see Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman putting up top 20 performances against the Jets and the Giants. Because I think what will matter a lot for San Francisco this year, with as good as their defense is, it's going to be partially how good is the other defense, but then can that other team's offense score any points against them? And we don't really know. We think Arizona's going to probably have some success offensively, and Philadelphia should be able to move the ball, but against the Jets and the Giants, they may just run it 300 times.
That's very true. We'll give you a couple of streaming options coming up later in the show in regards to the schedule. One from the 49ers that may be of interest if you're talking about guys you could take with a late round pick that may help you with an early part of the schedule based on some of these matchups. Let's go now to the Chargers. They get a very favorable schedule as well. Anytime you get a chance to play the Bengals and the Carolina Panthers in the first 3 weeks, you jump at that. So you got the Chargers facing the Bengals out of the gate. Then they get the Chiefs, what could be a shootout. Carolina, bad defense. Tampa Bay, much improved defense. But again, potential shootout because of what the offense could be there for Tampa Bay. So Ben, when you look at this schedule, we know the guys that you're drafting. Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, Mike Williams. Maybe you're taking a flyer on one of the secondary running backs, Josh Kelly and maybe Justin Jackson. But does this maybe take him up a couple of spots on your draft board, especially Eckler and Keenan Allen?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, in any league where you can trade, you want to know that your guys are going to be productive early in the year. Their value is going to change throughout September pretty heavily. And so I think all these guys, the opportunity that's here for them to potentially be good in the first couple weeks of the season and retain any kind of draft value or potentially move up and get you, some trade opportunities. Yeah, I mean, I think that bumps him up a little bit for me. But I also look at the schedule and I wonder, when does Justin Herbert come? I mean, it might be that week 6 home game at the Jets, a home game against the Jets. But I also look at that week 1 matchup. It would be pretty interesting to see Herbert against Burrow. It's very interesting that the NFL schedule has put the Bengals and the Chargers there. Does this mean that Herbert has the potential to start week 1? I mean, I know with the shortened offseason that might be a little less likely, but it is something to keep in mind. At what point might he take over?
Very, very true. Something that we're going to keep an eye on certainly in training camp. And then we get to the Cardinals. Not the best week 1 matchup because they got to face the 49ers on the road, but then they get Washington, Detroit, and Carolina. Again, we're going to be probably stacking a lot against the Carolina defense, the Jacksonville defense, 2 teams that we'll probably talk a lot about. And the Washington defense, we'll see how much they improve. Detroit's defense probably not going to improve that much. So when you look at these teams, Dave, we know you love Kyler Murray, you love DeAndre Hopkins. Does that just solidify things for you looking at this early season schedule?
It's not just weeks 2 through 4, Jamie. Look at weeks 2 through 9. There is a real opportunity here for the Cardinals to have a good record and a ton of fantasy numbers thanks to this slate that the NFL has given them. It's a real gift. So yes, of course, I'm still going to be excited about Kyler Murray, but I'm already pretty excited about him. He's already a top 5 quarterback for me. You guys know that I'm in the loony bin with DeAndre Hopkins. I'm still going to keep him where I have him ranked as a top 3 fantasy receiver. But I haven't been on board with you guys on Christian Kirk or Larry Fitzgerald. Now I'm starting to be a little more interested in both of those guys because of the early season schedule. I'd like to get Kirk and or Fitzgerald for that week 2 through 9 spread, I think that they could really put up some good numbers then. And the run defenses are a little bit tougher for Kenyon Drake, but it doesn't douse my excitement for him either. He could end up being a house of fire right away.
Yep, as long as all those guys stay healthy, could be a fun situation for the Cardinals offense. I'm sure Cliff Kingsbury sitting back in his very nice home, enjoying looking at the schedule and how it played out for him, as well as the Arizona Cardinals. Let's take a look now at the bad schedules, at least to start the season. Again, looking at the first 4 games, and not very pretty for a couple of teams in New York. Let's start with the Giants and who they have with their first 4 games of the season. And this is brutal. Starting with Pittsburgh, then at Chicago, San Francisco, and then the Rams. It doesn't get a lot easier along the rest of the way, but when you look at those first 4 games, Dave, any downgrade for the Giants? Obviously, the big name is Saquon Barkley. Are we concerned?
Well, I don't know how much easier it really gets for them. Maybe after their bye in week 11, we can look at their schedule and say, okay, that's favorable. But yeah, this is a tough start, and I think you have to know about it if you're going to draft Saquon Barkley with the top 3 pick. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It just means that you need to know that he could get off to a really tough start. I think this really hurts the excitement for Darius Slayton. It's a receiver that I was a big fan of, but if he's going to get off to a slow start, am I drafting him only to cut him after the first 4 weeks of the season because he's not producing? What does it mean for Sterling Shepard? Is his volume still going to be good? He's got tough matchups too. So I'm really nervous about the Giants. You know that I grade every team's schedule based on the defenses they play. The Giants rank dead last in both run and defense favorable matchups in the 2020 season. I think it's going to be a tough year for them.
Go now to the other team in New York with the Jets, and another team that has a rough start to their schedule. They get Buffalo on the road, then San Francisco. Don't sleep on the Indianapolis defense. That's going to be much better. And then you get to week 4. They got to play the Broncos on Thursday night, so a short week for them. And so when you look at these guys, this is a team we've been sort of, okay, maybe there's some optimism because healthy Sam Darnold, better offensive line. We've sort of downgraded Le'Veon Bell a little bit. Heath, when you look at the schedule, you look at the Jets. I know you like Denzel Mims. You're still a little bit optimistic about Le'Veon Bell. Where do you come out with the Jets after looking at these games?
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible start to the schedule, but the thing about it is, like, the 2 guys that I was really interested in drafting in the first 10 rounds of fantasy drafts are Le'Veon Bell and Jamison Crowder, and I wasn't drafting either of them because I thought they were going to be really efficient or score a bunch of touchdowns. It was because they were going to score a bunch of passes. They're going to be behind in these games. They're still probably going to throw 35 to 40 passes. They're still probably going to complete 5 each to Le'Veon Bell and Jamison Crowder. I think this could really crush Bell's start in non-PPR, but I would guess he'll catch enough passes to where he's still a mediocre number 2 running back for the first month of the season.
And of course, we're talking about an Adam Gase team, so by week 5, we could see Frank Gore as the lead running back for the Jets. You just never know with what Gase will do. Let's look now at the Texans. You want to talk about miserable. This is about as miserable as you can get when you look at the first 4 games for Houston. They get Kansas City on the road in the opener. Not an easy situation, especially if the fans will be there. Then Baltimore. Ugh. Then Pittsburgh on the road. And then Minnesota. Vikings defense probably not going to be as good as we've seen the last couple of years with some turnover there, but still that Minnesota defense should be pretty tough for the Houston offense to handle. And so another situation where a lot of people that were interested in, most importantly, the quarterback of Deshaun Watson. So Ben, any downgrade for Watson and his teammates based on these first 4 games?
I'm kind of going the other way with it. I think one of the issues with Watson is we never really know how much passing volume he'll get. I think we can be pretty comfortable now that he's going to throw plenty. Yes, these are really tough matchups, but Watson actually has some really interesting historical splits where he tends to be a little bit better in terms of yards per attempt and TD rate when his team is trailing. He's a gamer. We saw that at Clemson. And he's somebody that I think will compete heavily in these games. Yes, they're really tough defenses again, and he's got a weaker wide receiver core this season. But I actually kind of like the fact that I know that they're probably going to be trailing and he's going to throw plenty.
I just hate his offensive line, even though it may be better, going against Baltimore and Pittsburgh in week 2 and week 3. And if Chris Jones is there for the Chiefs in week 1, as we all expect, it could be tough for him in that matchup as well. So may have to be a little bit concerned about Watson, but I like your optimism. So for people drafting him still as a top 5 quarterback, hopefully it comes to fruition that he steps up and, as Ben said, is a gamer in those matchups. All right, so a lot of you like to look ahead to the fantasy playoffs because you think you're confident you're going to get there, and that's the way you should approach it. And so let's look at some teams that have some favorable fantasy playoff schedules. We're talking about weeks 14, 15, and 16. Remember, still a 16-game slate for the NFL for 2020. So when we start looking at those teams I don't think it's going to change how you approach the Kansas City Chiefs. But their schedule to close the season, at least for the fantasy playoffs, very favorable for them. They get Miami on the road, the Saints on the road. And so you look at the Saints, back-to-back road games, probably going to be a shootout. You can be confident in that. And then they get Atlanta coming home for Week 16. The Bucks, again, another team. We're probably going to not change how we look at their fantasy playoff schedule impacting their guys, but their schedule, close the season, favorable. Minnesota, not the easiest matchup, but still. At Atlanta, then Detroit. Those final 2 games. So if your team got the Bucks, get past that Week 14 matchup against Minnesota. If it's a struggle, Atlanta's defense, not the greatest, and Detroit probably not going to be the toughest matchup as well. Ben, when you look at the Bucks, has anything changed for you looking at these matchups when it comes to Tampa Bay's guys?
Not particularly. I mean, I'm certainly in agreement with you that when you look that far ahead, it can be a little bit of a challenge. It is interesting that they have that Week 13 bye, and the Panthers do as well. Those are teams that if you're playing in certain formats where Week 13 is part of your playoff structure, that's one of the latest buys we've seen. So you want to be cognizant of that. But I'm not too worried about those matchups. I think they're not a team that I'm going to adjust too much.
And the Eagles, another team that we're liking their fantasy playoff schedule. They get New Orleans, at Arizona, and at Dallas. So 2 games on the road, weeks 15, week 16. But Philadelphia, as long as they're healthy, could be putting up some great production. We're excited about Miles Sanders. Jalen Reagor's a guy that could have a lot of big production as a rookie if the other guys are hurt. Zach Ertz, you know about him. Dallas Goedert could be somebody you're looking at. So, Dave, when you look at this schedule for the Eagles, potential shootout with the Saints, good matchups against some maybe questionable defenses with the Cardinals and Cowboys. Are you going to adjust anything for the Eagles guys looking ahead to these playoff matchups?
You know, it's funny. We talk about, well, what's the point of looking at these defenses because we don't know who's going to be healthy and who's not. We don't know who's healthy and who's not going to be healthy at quarterback for Philadelphia by the time we get to the late season. But yes, I think the Eagles' schedule is full of a lot of high-scoring games, certainly late in the year. I actually think it's going to be a tough start for Philly. It's one of the things that's made me kind of pump the brakes a little bit on Miles Sanders. Maybe I shouldn't be too excited to take him as high as I've been taking him in fantasy drafts because the early schedule is a little bit challenging. But once it opens up right around the middle of the year, I think the Eagles take off, no pun intended, and that includes late in the year when we're in our fantasy playoffs.
Let's look ahead to some teams that have some bad fantasy playoff schedules. And some news coming out of Jacksonville. They're going to have a new backup quarterback, which is going to make things good for Gardner Minshew because I don't think Mike Glennon is going to threaten Gardner Minshew to be the starter. So Heath, I'm sure, is very excited about that news. But the Jaguars get Tennessee, Baltimore, and Chicago to close the season. The Titans' defense has been good. Baltimore's defense we know is going to be really good. And who knows about the Chicago defense, but I think they'll be a little bit better than what we saw last year. Could be a little bit tough for that Jaguars team, which I'm sure at that point is definitely looking ahead to 2021. So Heath, when you look at this schedule, I know you like Gardner Minshew. Downgrading him or any of the Jaguars looking ahead?
You know, I think a good guy to contrast him with is Daniel Jones. We talked about Jones' start to the season. Minshew's schedule over the first month, much better than Jones. I'd still like to draft Minshew as a number 2 quarterback, and I'll worry about that when we get to it. And we talked about how things can look so much different by the end of the year. 2 of those defenses on that list, the Titans and the Bears, I have really no idea. The Titans lost some pieces in the offseason. They dedicated a lot of money to Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry. I'm not sure how good their defense is going to be. It'll be above average, but I don't think one that we avoid. And then the Bears, by the time we get to that point in the season, they may be looking ahead. They may be playing for absolutely nothing.
The one thing about the Titans, they usually play the Jaguars very tough, and I'm sure we can expect a big game from Derrick Henry against the Jaguars. It seems to happen once a year. Let's look at the Atlanta schedule going into the fantasy playoffs. They get the Chargers on the road. We know this Chargers defense could be nasty if they're healthy. Tampa Bay's defense, again, going to be much improved. And then they have to go to Kansas City, which could be a shootout, but we know Arrowhead Stadium, not the easiest place to play. Ben, any concern over the Falcons, again, looking that far ahead?
Yeah, I mean, certainly 2 road games is not great. We know Atlanta plays a little bit better in the dome at home, but as you noted, I mean, these could turn into shootouts as well. We don't really know what the defenses will be like for Tampa Bay and Kansas City at that point, but there's a potential for Matt Ryan to throw plenty of passes in those games as well. They threw, I believe, the most passes in the NFL last season, so that is what we're kind of hoping for from Atlanta's offense again this year to support Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley and Hayden Hurst, and it's certainly possible those could be some shootouts as well.
Yes, and you are correct. The Falcons did lead the NFL in passing attempts last year. It's part of the reason why we like Hayden Hurst as a sleeper, and as he tweeted today, Hayden Hurst should be better than Austin Hooper if you're looking at the replacement option for Hooper in Atlanta. Buffalo might have the worst schedule of all when you look at the fantasy playoffs because they get to play the Steelers at home and then back-to-back road games at Denver and at New England. Now, Denver's defense should be a work in progress, but again, going into Mile High Stadium, never an easy situation. And who knows what the Patriots will be looking like when we get to Week 16 based on what their offense could be, but we still expect their defense to be tough, and that could be a game that decides the AFC East. That will be a primetime game between Buffalo and New England in Foxborough. I think you look at the Bills, their schedule up and down a little bit. I'm still going to keep the guys in the same spots. Josh Allen still a top 10 quarterback. The running backs still more number 3 options. Devin Singletary, the better of the two. And Stephon Diggs, I know, Ben, you like him, but I still think he's more of a borderline starter as opposed to a must-start guy. So we'll see how this schedule impacts the Bills by the end of the season. But like we've been saying, I think you get the theme. Don't necessarily plan your draft based on the end of the season schedule. You want to look more at the beginning part of the schedule. And for Buffalo, the Jets, Miami, 2 very good matchups to open the season, and then the Raiders in Las Vegas in Week 4. So speaking of starting the season, we like to give you some streaming options that could help you in case you just want to take a flyer on somebody, mostly in some deeper leagues. And a lot of it has to do with the quarterback position. We're going to tell you a lot about streamers throughout the course of the offseason. Just want to give you a little example of some guys that you could be targeting with late round picks. And a couple of quarterbacks jump off the page here. You have Ben Roethlisberger because of a very favorable schedule. And we showed you the Chargers schedule with Tyrod Taylor. But for Ben Roethlisberger, he's got a chance to play the Giants, the Broncos, the Texans, and the Titans. And as he said, the Titans defense may not be the same as we saw last year. Taylor gets the Bengals, the Chiefs, the Panthers, and the Bucks. So Dave, when you look at those two guys, and we've seen a lot of different drafts that we've done where somebody takes 2 quarterbacks, you're going to be in a lot of leagues where people probably take multiple quarterbacks. Roethlisberger could be sitting there. Tyrod Taylor definitely will be sitting there. Do you like the chance to take a flyer on one of those 2 guys, Roethlisberger or Tyrod, to be a potential starter for you early in the year?
Oh, yeah. If there's a position to stream in fantasy this year, quarterback is it. And as I'm still a little nervous about Roethlisberger because we don't know just how his elbow will recover from his surgery. But if he's on, holy moly, he could end up being the steal of the draft because of that great early season schedule. And the Steelers just might keep on rolling right through that. And with Tyrod, we know the last time we saw him play, he didn't throw the ball very well, but he's got nice targets now in LA, and we know the Chargers defense will help him stay in competitive games, so he could be good too. One more name to throw on the fire here for streaming quarterbacks, Phillip Rivers. We've seen him start off the year hot. Indianapolis' schedule is really nice through the first, I'd say, third of the year, not just the first few weeks. I think if Rivers can get on the same page as his receivers, he could also be a nice streamer to begin the year. And now we're talking about quarterbacks that you can just wait on draft day. It just pushes down the value of all the other quarterbacks not named Mahomes or Jackson.
And Roethlisberger is somebody that we spoke about this week that could be more than a streamer. Tyrod has been alluded to. We could see a situation where Justin Herbert takes over. Maybe it is week 1, and we're not even talking about Tyrod Taylor, but Rivers is another guy, great call, Dave, that could get off to a good start and maybe carry you through several weeks just in case your quarterback situation not the best for what your draft came out with. I want to give you one other position that you could be looking at, a guy that we haven't seen drafted in a lot of our seasonal leagues, certainly in rookie-only formats, is Brandon Ayuk, the rookie wide receiver for the 49ers. So, Ben, is he somebody that when you look at the schedule, we know San Francisco is going to run the ball a lot, but they don't have the best receiving core right now after Emmanuel Sanders left. Deebo Samuel and Ayuk look like the starters there. Any interest in him with a late-round pick now?
Yeah, sure. He's a little bit of an older prospect, a little bit more polished, was very good at junior college before 2 years at Arizona State, and he counts yards after the catch as a skill, much like Deebo Samuel and George Kittle. That's how the San Francisco offense runs. It would not surprise me in these games where we expect San Francisco to run a lot for them to also do some play action and get the ball out quick in these shorter passes that give these receivers room to run. And it could be the case that Ayuk has some big plays in that type of setup. I think the big concern would just be passing volume. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking at this wide receiver class and you're looking at a guy who could maybe make an impact right away as a rookie, I think that could be Ayuk.
And again, the schedule for the 49ers, Arizona, the Jets, the Giants, and Eagles. And we're talking about him well past where you're drafting guys like Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb, and then the second wave of rookies like Jalen Reagor and Justin Jefferson, and then, even beyond guys like Denzel Mims and Laviska Shenault. So I think you could see maybe Ayuk creep up a little bit, but he's still going past those guys. And for a lot of leagues, especially 10-team formats, may not get drafted. But if you are looking for somebody that could help you early in the season, as Ben said, they could take some shots, could try to showcase him a little bit. And the schedule is definitely favorable for the 49ers, favorable for Deebo Samuel as well. All right, there's our breakdown of the schedule. When we come back, we're going to take a look at a mock draft that we just did this week. It's a half PPR mock draft, and we'll talk about maybe some questionable picks. Tyreek Hill in round 1, Derrick Henry in round 2. They should go in those spots, but maybe some of the players that they went ahead of. We'll tell you about that next here on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. We're taking a look at our recent 12-team half PPR mock draft. You start 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, tight end, flex. Just for you, Dave and Heath, no kicker. We didn't draft one this time. Defense, quarterback, 5 reserves, 6 reserves, 15 rounds. It was fun. Let's take a look at the review here. I'm Jamie, that's Dave, that's Heath, and that's Ben. So let's look at round 1 as we break down the first 12 picks. And not a lot of surprises here. Maybe one small one with the guy at number 7, Tyreek Hill, going ahead of Davante Adams. That was Ben Gretsch's spot. And Ben, you love Tyreek Hill. Tell us why you love him more than Davante Adams.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can get a little caught looking at what he did last year in his 12 games. He was obviously injured multiple times. 2 of his 12 games, he played fewer than 20% of the snaps. He also only played about 50% of the snaps in the first game he came back from that collarbone break. So you look at his per game averages and things like that, they're going to be a little bit less impressive. But you look back at 2018, how good he was, and then you start thinking about 2020, and you know that he's tied to a better quarterback at this point. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers is getting up there in age, and Patrick Mahomes is just a phenomenal player. You know he's going to be the number 1. You know he's going to be heavily involved and very efficient. I don't think it's that crazy to have him ahead of Davante Adams at this point. I think he's still ascending as a player, a little bit younger than Adams as well. So I think that especially in half-point PPR where you don't need a 100-catch guy necessarily, that he could very easily be the wide receiver 2 or even the wide receiver 1.
He definitely could. Again, like I said, we're nitpicking here. I was glad you took him at 7 because I was picking at 8, and I like Adams just that much better. I think Adams could actually challenge Michael Thomas to be the number 1 receiver. What did we see in 2018 when Adams played a full season, and what did we see in the second half of last year when Adams was a monster coming back from that toe injury? So I think it's going to be fun between those 3 guys at the top. Julio Jones will factor in. DeAndre Hopkins will probably still be there, especially Dave's very high on Hopkins. So you could see a great group of wide receivers at the top. And as we talked about on our show when we were breaking down wide receivers this week, could be a little bit of a fall off after that. So if you like Hill over Adams like Ben does, you can take him there. If you like Adams like I do, I would take Adams over Hill. So it's a personal preference. And as you see, that's the way the first round went in our draft. Let's go now to round 2. And again, half PPR scoring. Keep that in mind because you're going to see a player at number 14 that we've kind of been down on, Derrick Henry, going at 14th overall. That was to Heath Cummings. So Heath, I know you like him in non-PPR. And obviously, half PPR not the same as full PPR. But 18 catches. He's got fewer catches than games played in his NFL career. I think any format where you're rewarding catches to a certain degree, you got to take him a little bit lower. Why'd you take him there?
Well, what we talk about with running backs is that 50 catch mark to be a first rounder. And I think that makes sense, but that's 25 points in non-PPR. And I don't think if Derrick Henry plays 16 games, I expect him to score as many or more touchdowns than any running back. And the more that I look at what he did last year and what he did in the second half 2 years ago, I understand the concerns about how many touches he got last year, but we're drafting Dalvin Cook as a surefire top 5 pick no matter what. And Dalvin Cook's missed 19 games over 3 seasons in the NFL, and it's the potential of injury that's scaring us away from Henry. So I just think if Henry plays 16 games, 15 games like he did last year, you're looking at a guy that's going to be a top 5 back likely in any format.
Very, very true. But over 400 total touches is just a little bit more risky than Dalvin Cook's previous injury history, at least in my opinion. So I would not have taken Henry that high. I understand your optimism, and I'm sure based on average draft position, once we get to the end of the summer, Derrick Henry will probably be a first-round pick after leading the NFL in rushing and scoring 18 total touchdowns. As you saw in round 2, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I took him in that spot ahead of some other pretty prominent running backs, Austin Eckler, Kenyon Drake in particular, especially when you're factoring in the half PPR scoring. But I am over the moon for the kid, and I think he's going to be an absolute superstar with the Chiefs, so I will be aggressive in drafting him. It was the only chance I would get him because he wasn't coming back to me in round 3. So I will take Clyde Edwards-Helaire there, and I was thrilled about it. I'll show you more about my team when we come back and review our teams in a little bit. Let's look now at round 3. Let's show you the results from that round, and it starts to get a little bit more interesting as we go through and some of the questionable decisions that some owners have to make. Now, this wasn't really a questionable one, just an interesting pick. Dave taking Tyler Lockett at number 29 ahead of some other receivers that you can debate. Amari Cooper at 30, Mike Evans at 31, Odell Beckham at 33, Too bad Adam Mazur's not on the show because Adam Thielen at 34, I think Adam would probably take him a round earlier. So, Dave, you take Tyler Lockett there over those other guys. Tell us why.
First and foremost, I needed a receiver. I spent my first 2 picks on running back, so the pressure was on to take a receiver, and I thought that there would be a drop-off in talent at wide receiver if I took another running back at round 3. And I just love the way Lockett started last season. Did you know that he was on pace for more PPR points through the first 9 weeks of the season than every wide receiver except for Michael Thomas and Mike Evans? That's outstanding. And I think Seattle's schedule further cements home the point that they're going to need points this year. And they don't have necessarily a difficult schedule for the passing game. I think that you're going to see Tyler Lockett keep up his hyper efficiency, continue to get targets, maybe even see more targets, and be a potential top 12 fantasy wide receiver. I am drafting on that upside. It's why I took him in round 3.
Good debate if he's better than DK Metcalf. I think it's a difficult debate, but some would make it. I think Adam Mazur would. So we'll see if Lockett continues to distance himself from Metcalf, or maybe both these guys are great and Russell Wilson has another top 3 fantasy finish. Let's go now to round 4, and this is where we start to get some fun picks after the guys that you usually see. And Ben Gretsch continues to be aggressive with one player in particular. It's the guy at number 42 with Jonathan Taylor taking him after some of the established running backs, Todd Gurley in particular coming off at 41, but ahead of David Johnson and James Conner, who come in at 44 for Conner, 46 for Johnson. So, Ben, when you look at Taylor, not guaranteed the starting job. I don't know if you're drafting him with the hope that he wins the job in training camp or just that by the middle of the season he is the best running back for the Colts, like what happened with Philadelphia last year with Miles Sanders. What's your outlook for Taylor, and why are you taking him so soon?
Yeah, I just think he's a much better fit to be the workhorse back than Marlon Mack. If you look at their size, just simply their size, Taylor's about 13 pounds heavier and an inch shorter in terms of BMI. Marlon Mack's about a 40th percentile BMI guy. He's kind of a taller, lankier back. Jonathan Taylor's like a 90th percentile workhorse, and I think you're going to see that once the season gets underway, and that he's going to take this job. And the Colts are another team that have a pretty reasonable schedule over the first half of the season. Very winnable the first couple of months. They're going to run a lot, and I think both Taylor and Mack are going to be effective. But I think during that time, Taylor's going to establish himself as the better early down running back and hopefully run away with that job a little bit. And especially in half PPR, I think he makes a lot of sense, has a lot of upside, and I don't really see him as that much riskier of a player than James Conner or David Johnson.
Two guys that, in terms of Conner at least, could be sharing the workload. We know the Steelers drafted Anthony McFarland. They've talked about maybe still giving Benny Snell some work. And then for David Johnson, look, he's been a disappointment, whether due to injury or poor play over the last couple of years. And we'll see how he does in Houston with that difficult schedule. They asked me on CBS Sports HQ on Thursday night during our schedule release show to give an early start of the week, and I went with Jonathan Taylor just for fun. But that matchup against Jacksonville, they could be winning that game in hand, and we could see Taylor, again, sharing the work with Marlon Mack, maybe having the better performance than Marlon Mack in that week 1 game. So Taylor could get off to a good start. Like Ben said, the schedule sets up favorably for the Colts, and if he's better than Mack as we expect, could be early in the season where he is the lead running back there for Indianapolis. Let's go now to round 5, and we get to another fun pick. And Dave, I know you like DK Metcalf. You just told us how much you like Tyler Lockett, but you passed on him for Zach Ertz. How come?
Because I didn't want to have 2 Seahawks on my team. I didn't want to put all my eggs in that basket. And trust me, I wrestled with this one. We only have a minute to make the pick. I spent at least 45 seconds agonizing, hands on my face, trying to figure out what's the best move. And the bottom line is I didn't want to have 2 Seahawks receivers on my roster. And I feel like round 5 is exceptional value for Zach Ertz, particularly in leagues where the catches are going to count for something. So I went with Ertz. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if by the end of the year Metcalf had better numbers in terms of yards than Ertz. But I think Ertz will catch more passes, and I think he's got a chance to score as many, if not a couple more touchdowns. I filled the tight end position in round 5.
Ben, I want to ask you something that Dave just brought up there about taking 2 players on the same team, especially in the early part of your draft, because we're going to see situations with maybe you can get Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, maybe the 2 Rams wide receivers of Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, the 2 Falcons guys with Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley. When you're faced with that situation, do you pivot somewhere else, or you just say, I'm going to load up on these 2 superstar guys and hope for the best?
It's totally dependent on the offense for me. I mean, I think there are teams that I feel comfortable doing that with, and there are teams that I'm a little bit more concerned about. Now, if you do it with 2 receivers, for me, that makes the quarterback way more of a priority. You're already committing to that team throwing enough for both of those receivers to be very productive. It's that kind of, if you're not first, you're last mentality. You're already going for that. So you might as well grab that quarterback. You're not adding a lot more risk to your team already. If that offense struggles, your team's going to struggle. But if you get Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley, and I think that's fine with Atlanta's offense where they don't really have a strong number 3, and both of those guys could be top 12 receivers, I think you also want to target Matt Ryan and really just build out that stack in your lineup.
Just hate that bye week, and as we showed you, could be a rough fantasy playoff schedule, but could be something that does work out well for you. And we saw that a couple years ago with the Chiefs, with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, another duo that you could pair together round 1, round 2, if you want to go that route. All right, Heath, so I know you're like Mark Andrews over Zach Ertz as we take a look at round 6. So Dave takes Ertz in round 5, and you're able to get Mark Andrews a round later, essentially, in round 6. Not necessarily full round, but as you see here at 62nd overall. What's the difference for you between these two guys? Andrews ascending, Ertz descending. Just how do you break it down between these two guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is they're going in opposite directions. Dave loves Jalen Reagor. The Eagles have a ton of wide receivers. I don't think there's a very good chance that they're throwing 260 passes to their tight ends again this year. And that was really the only reason that Ertz was able to bounce back. If you'll remember, he really struggled at the start of 2019. And part of that was because he was sharing those tight end targets with Dallas Goedert more than he had in the past. Again, Goddard's ascending, Ertz is descending. I don't think that Goddard's share of the tight end targets is going to go down this year. And I do think the total tight end targets are going to go down. So that means the Ertz share is probably going down.
And then for Andrews, we'll see how he works with a couple of new receivers as well, with the Ravens adding Devin Duvernay and James Prochet, but hopefully a little bit more from Marquise Brown. But I certainly see your point with Andrews maybe being better than Ertz, and that's why they typically go back-to-back in a lot of our drafts. You also saw DeAndre Swift get drafted there. I took another rookie running back because load up on upside. Swift should be able to take over for Kerryon Johnson at some point during the season, hopefully sooner rather than later. I like the chances of DeAndre Swift hitting as a home run type of player, and getting him in round 6 was, in my opinion, an absolute steal. But we'll tell you about our teams coming up next here on Fantasy Football Today. We're going to break down what our rosters look like so you can see how some of the picks that we just talked about, how they all fit together with our teams. And one in particular, you see Mike Evans and Josh Jacobs that may have ended up on the same fantasy roster. We'll break down those teams next here on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. Taking a look at our teams from our most recent half PPR mock draft. You start 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and a flex. Of course, quarterback, tight end, and a defense. And so let's take a look at our teams. We'll start with Ben Gretas' roster here, and it's a fun roster as always for Ben. A couple of the staples on his team missing. No A.J. Brown, no DJ Moore, so Ben must feel a little bit shaken that he doesn't have some of his top-tier guys here. But I want to ask you 2 questions, Ben. We'll start with the one wide receiver with Stephon Diggs. You are very confident in Diggs. Tough schedule to close the season. Going to be with a new quarterback in Josh Allen. How do you think things are going to go for him, and why are you so confident?
Yeah, I think the big question with Diggs is what type of a target share does he step into? I think because of the first-round pick they gave up to get him and more, and the way they were trying to get Antonio Brown last offseason, I think they really view him as a number 1 in a way that Minnesota didn't. Over the last couple of years, Diggs played a couple different roles with Minnesota. Last year, he didn't even see 100 targets, was very much in a downfield role. His average depth of target was in that Will Fuller, Deshaun Jackson range. The year before, he had over 100 catches, 150 target season, and was in more that Michael Thomas, Juju Smith-Schuster type underneath role. I think when you put those 2 years together and see how good Diggs can be at all depths of the field, that when he goes to Buffalo, he definitely has the potential to be that legitimate number 1. I think I got to look at Heath's projections. I think he has Diggs projected for about 120 targets and John Brown at about 110. I think that gap will be more like 30 targets than 10 targets. And I think that's how you see Diggs be a really strong option, even in a low volume passing offense. I would compare it to Allen Robinson last year, who had a similarly embattled quarterback, one with accuracy concerns. The Bears throw a little bit more than the Bills, but Robinson was able to put up a top 10 season, being that clear number 1 option in that offense. And that's what I hope from Diggs this year.
In round 5, it's not a bad way to go for a guy that should be the number 1 receiver for what hopefully is an ascending offense and an ascending quarterback in Josh Allen. Real quick, just based on the quarterback situation, Jared Goff, a couple other owners took 2 quarterbacks. Just give me 20 seconds on what your thoughts are for Jared Goff as a potential fantasy starter.
He had some really big volume games last year. Obviously, the offense struggled a little bit, and I just think this is a team that could the passing game could be a lot more efficient this year after Sean McVay has an opportunity to kind of re-script things. Obviously, the 11 personnel didn't work as well last season, early in the year after the Super Bowl the year before, but I think there's some chance to bounce back to 2018 levels.
Hopefully that's the case for people that have to settle for a quarterback. We told you some other guys based on the NFL schedule. Ben Roethlisberger, maybe Tyrod Taylor could be guys if you do miss on the quarterback that you like on your draft day. Let's take a look at Dave's roster here. And Dave, when you take a look at some of the guys that we've been talking about, you said you passed on taking the second Seattle wide receiver in DK Metcalf and took a tight end. You end up with one of your starting wide receivers being Sterling Shepard. So we said the Giants' schedule is brutal. And we've talked a lot about, is Slayton the best receiver? Is it Shepard? Is it maybe Golden Tate? What's your confidence level in Shepard as a starter for your roster?
It's a little lower than it was yesterday because of the schedule being what it is for New York. But let's face it, if they're going to trail, I'll take the guy that's got a shot at over 100 targets this year. And I think that's Shepard in the league will catch his count. I think that'll help him out. I think he can be a dependable number 3 receiver for your fantasy team. And yeah, my receiving core is definitely lacking. It's not great having Tyler Boyd as your number 2 and Shepard as your number 3. But I can't resist the values that I got to get Zach Ertz in round 5, Kyler Murray in round 7. My running back depth is out of this world good. I'm happy with the team, and I think I can find good receivers as the year goes on if I need to replace Boyd and Shepard.
Let's go from Dave's team, take a look at Heath's team here. And again, we told you a couple guys that Heath has on his roster with Derrick Henry and Mark Andrews. But the guy that you have right now starting at your flex, and that could change, could be Tevin Coleman, could be Preston Williams. Right now is Ronald Jones. He could be the best running back in Tampa Bay. We just don't know how that's going to work after they drafted Keyshawn Vaughn, but we know that we've talked a lot about Jones and his struggles last year and what the outlook could be for him this year. You got a good value on him, getting him in round 7 potentially, or do you feel like maybe you took him a little bit too soon and could have waited maybe a round or 2 to get Ronald Jones just based on how everybody is viewing him?
The way I'm pretty much going to handle this, and I don't know where Keyshawn Vaughn's going to be going in July or August, so I may have to change this approach, but I'm pretty fine with just taking Ronald Jones around after Keyshawn Vaughn goes, because Jones never goes before Vaughn, and I think right now it's probably a 50-50 split over who's going to have the most carries, most touches this season for Tampa Bay. I do expect that the one benefit to Jones is I think he'll start week 1. We'll see if Vaughn can take that job in the first quarter of the season, but I doubt that Bruce Arians is going with a rookie with Tom Brady out there in week 1.
Yes, our quarantine storyline that we keep talking about. What's the offseason going to be like for these rookies? So Vaughn may struggle in comparison to winning the job from Jones, very similar to a lot of these rookies that we talked about. And speaking of rookies, let's take a look at my team here. And I took 2 of them, prominent ones, Clyde Edwards-Helaire and DeAndre Swift. And one thing that I did, and I've done this now twice in taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire early, is I've taken veteran running backs that I think have a good opportunity in 2020 to pair with him. So in round 3, after taking Edwards-Helaire, in round 2, I took Melvin Gordon. Then round 4, I took Todd Gurley. So just in case Edwards-Helaire isn't the player that I think he's going to be, or maybe gets off to a slow start, I still have very good replacement options, and I could backfill the flex spot if I need to by putting Gurley into the starting lineup. So that's kind of how I approached after taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire. All right, we got a fun show for you next week. It's going to be fantasy football. Yesterday, we take a look back at some of the best stars in the NFL and what their fantasy seasons were. We're going to have a lot of fun with that all throughout the week. And of course, you can check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast. We'll break down the schedule more in depth on our podcast. For Dave, for Heath, for Ben, I'm Jamie. Thanks for watching Fantasy Football Today. Want more of the Fantasy Football Today podcast and nonstop year-round fantasy advice? It's simple. Hit the subscribe button and hang with us all throughout the year.